Whether you are considering or being made to consider suspension, if you're not sure this is the right thing for you, then you can get free confidential advice and information on your situation from an advisor at the Student Advice Service. We understand that suspension can sometimes be a worrying and stressful experience, and you may be expected to make decisions at a difficult time. We've made this podcast to try and allay some of those concerns and give you some things to bear in mind when faced with the prospect of suspension. We've met many students considering suspension due to a health reason or personal circumstances such as a pressing family matter. Some find they're not in the best place to study or are simply not well enough to keep up with the demands of their course. If this is the case for you, maybe you've been feeling unwell for some time and have found that this has had an impact on your studies. You may have had to deal with a difficult situation outside of the academic environment, which has taken up time and energy to deal with, and you don't have much left in the tank. Even if your academic work isn't suffering, if you're not well enough to study, then you may want to consider a period of suspension. You're not alone, and there is help and advice available. Colleges and the university can allow students who have a genuine reason to suspend their studies for a period. During suspension, students are able to stop the clock on their studies and take time off, with a view to returning at a fixed point in the future, usually at the same point in the next academic year. You might also have heard this process called rustication, intercalation, or intermission, as colleges call it different things. If you are considering suspension, there are many different people you can discuss this with: your tutor or supervisor, an advisor at the Student Advice Service, a member of your college welfare team, such as the dean, a counsellor from the University Counselling Service, your GP, or your advisor at the Disability Advisory Service, if you have one. You can also discuss it with friends and family if you feel this would be helpful, although we know this isn't always the case. There are a lot of things to think about before you suspend. Where will you live? How will you see your friends? What will you do about funding? And what will it be like when you come back? All of these things can be overcome with the right help and support. Every year students suspend, and most return to complete their studies successfully. If, having considered all these points, you feel suspension is right for you, then you will need to provide medical evidence if you're suspending on health grounds. You'll also need a medical certificate when you return to prove your fitness to study. If you're looking to suspend your studies for another reason, then discuss this with your college to see if it's an option, and if it is, what evidence might be required. If you are being suspended on health or academic grounds and you don't feel happy about it, then there is an appeals process you can follow. If you're an undergraduate, you can speak to your senior tutor, who will be able to advise you on the process for your particular college, as they do tend to vary. You should be able to find this in your college handbook, or you can always contact an advisor from the Student Advice Service, who will be able to help you navigate the process. If you're a graduate, you'll need to complete a GSO 17 form, which your Graduate Studies Administrator can provide for you. This needs to be completed by you, your supervisor, and your college. The maximum number of term suspension which may be approved is 6 terms for postgraduate research students. For postgraduate taught students, the number of terms you can suspend for is equivalent to the length of the course. So, for a 1-year course, you can suspend for up to 3 terms, and for a 2-year course, 6 terms. You'll then need to complete a GSO 17A form when you wish to return. Whether you are suspending your studies voluntarily or not, it's a good idea for you to have the arrangements for your suspension set out in writing before you go. We know that many undergraduates are given academic conditions to return, so it's a good idea to make sure the conditions are clear and specific. You know what will happen if you don't meet these, and that any responsibilities during your time off are laid out. We also recommend asking the college to provide you with an appropriate named contact to help with any queries while you're away, as well as setting out what access, if any, you will have to the college facilities during your time off. Finally, it can also be a good idea to discuss anything you might need help with on your return, such as accommodation or help with reintegration, to ensure that even before you leave, you're in a good position to return to your studies when the time comes. You'll also need to let Student Finance or your funding body know that you're suspending your studies. A standard undergraduate will have funding available for the length of their course plus 1 year. It's a good idea to discuss your individual circumstances with Student Finance to see if there is any additional funding available to you during suspension. If you're a graduate, then your funding will depend on the terms of your funding source. If your suspension is likely to cause you financial difficulty, you may be able to apply to the Access to Learning Fund, which is available to suspended students. As a suspended student, you will still have access to university facilities such as libraries, the Career Service and the Counselling Service, but your access to college may be limited. Talk to an advisor if you have any questions or concerns about this. If you're an international student, then you'll need to be aware of the impact of suspension on your visa. If you're on a Tier 4 visa, then you won't be able to stay in the UK whilst on suspension. So talk to the university's immigration team as soon as possible if you have any queries or concerns about this. Your housing may be affected by suspension if you currently live in college or university accommodation. So contact an advisor at the Student Advice Service if you would like to get some information about finding private accommodation if you plan to stay in Oxford, or find out what your rights are if you're living out and plan to leave. You may also find it helpful to look up AUSU's Suspended Student Campaign, SUSCAM, on Facebook or Twitter, which has been created to campaign for the rights of suspended students. They also host events to keep you in touch with your peers while you're away and when you return, and enable you to exchange ideas and experiences. At the Student Advice Service, you can get free, confidential and independent advice and information about suspending your studies. We can help you navigate the process, and we can come along to any meetings you may have about suspension. We're a small, friendly team of advisors, and we're used to getting a range of questions, so if you need anything, get in touch.